Hello folks, this is Sula speaking. You're listening to another video for Teamfight Tactics. Well, the end of set 12 has arrived. Set 13 is going to be on the public beta environment actually today as I'm recording this video. Going on the PvE a little bit earlier than we thought. So what I want to do is do our traditional look back at set 12, do our retrospective. Let's look at what went well in this set, what didn't go so well in this set, and try to evaluate the game that we've been playing for, I guess it's been almost 4 months now that this set has been out. Overall, this set was kind of meh, not great, not terrible. I think that I'm going to refer to this set as aggressively mediocre overall. There definitely have been worse sets, but there's definitely been a lot of better sets too, and I don't think that this one's going to leave a lot of long-lasting impressions on people's memories. As far as what's going on in the background, this is just some live stream footage. I did some ranked games the final Friday before the set 13 was going to be on PvE. So again, you will not see the commentary here matching up with the little impression of me in the corner of the screen because this is pre-recorded footage. But I want to have something on in the background so people can watch something while you're listening to me talk here. Just a quick word about this game. So these games were done at, I think this is like Gold 2 or Gold 3 elo, relatively low because I think I only played 10 ranked games the entire set. I did have a very silly opening here that I did want to spend just a second on. I was initially thinking of looking to play Warwick reroll because I thought that I kind of had a decent setup for it here because I had the pair of Warwicks. And you see I pick up the Blitzcrank here, and then on this third minion round, I'm actually going to end up getting another Warwick here as well. The only problem is I really do not have items for Warwick. I have a tier and a rod, but I was still thinking at this point in time, I was like, you know what, maybe if I can just get a bow, then I can use the rod to make a Rage Blade, which is one of Warwick's key items. And then maybe I can use the Reforger on the tier. And this was also a game that had the item anvil start. So I was thinking, well, maybe I can pull like a Quicksilver Sash or a Bloodthirster or a Titan's Resolve, one of the items that's good on Warwick. I was thinking maybe I can pull one of them out of the anvil. And then I also got this augment that was really good for Warwick reroll. Looking at the different options here, I was like, no, Wandering Trainer maybe. I could maybe try to play around the emblems. If I'm going to reroll, it's not Epoch, because that would accelerate my level quickly. But look, shields up. Your Vanguards have stronger shields. Vanguards become immune to crowd control for 6 seconds. Gain a Rumble and a Blitzcrank. I was like, oh my god, this is like the #1 augment you want if you're going to play Warwick. Except for maybe the one that gives you all the Rage Blades. I was like, all right, I'm definitely going to take this, and we're going to reroll Warwick here. I was like, all right, so I'm going to clear my bench of all these spellcasting units to get up to 10 gold, and we'll play the Rumble, and now I'm going to look to just pull this item, and it's all AP items. I was like, what the heck? Gnasher's Tooth, Jeweled Gauntlet, Archangel Staff when I'm trying to play Warwick? What? Like, I was like, what can I do with these? These don't make any sense. So, all right, I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to use the Reforger here. I'm going to reforge this Giant Slayer, and I'm going to take the belt. I'm going to reforge this, and what pops out? Another rod and a Morello. So I have a Morello's, I have 2 rods and a tier. So I was like, I can't play Warwick reroll with this. That is not possible. So we're going to go for, you know what we have? We have a really good Vanguard argument. We're going to play Hui plus Ezreal plus Vanguards. We're going to do the 6 Vanguard, 4 Blaster. We're going to play through Hui. And so that is now the plan for this game because there's no way I can reroll Warwick with these items. It was just hilarious how the game decided to give me nothing but AP items when I'm trying to reroll Warwick. Okay. So that's the gameplay you're going to be seeing in the background. All right, set 12. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this set. So first up, let's go ahead and cover the main set mechanic. And that is because the main set mechanic was, of course, charms. That you would get these little charms that pop up in the store. For most of the game, they pop up every 3 shops. And then in the late game, they pop up every other shop. And then they would typically cost gold, some amount of gold, and then they'd produce some kind of effect. So let's start with the good things about this set. And I want to say overall, I do think that charms were a lot better than the set 11 mechanic, which was encounters. They are basically encounters that you had some degree of control over. I was not a fan of set 11 at all, and I really disliked the encounter mechanic. The big reason being that the players had no agency in the encounters whatsoever. Literally, the encounters would just happen to you. and you just had to react to them. That you were never told what the encounters would be ahead of time. You would just occasionally something would pop up and happen. By the way, I get a Hui here on literally the first round of level 4, which is the first possible round I can see him. So that's a pretty big high roll when I'm playing into Hui. Anyway, so like I said, the encounters, no warning ahead of time, no way to plan around them. They would just happen and you had to react, which is really not good for a strategy game. I've always said I like strategy games when you do the planning and you make things happen. I think strategy games are at their worst when things happen to you, which is, of course, what the encounters were. So in that respect, I think the charms were a major upgrade, just simply because you could choose to buy the charm or not buy the charm. And like, that's literally player agency at work. You have a decision to make. There is something you can do or not do. So in that regard alone, I think that the charms were an improvement over set 11's set mechanic with having the encounters. So big plus just for that. Even though I'm going to talk about some of the problems with the charms in a minute, that in and of itself was still an improvement over what we had in the previous set. The other big thing that the charms did is they served as a gold sink. And what I mean by that is a way for players to spend gold to prevent them from having too much money. And that was a really big problem in set 11. There was too much econ in the game, and it was really distorting how the gameplay functioned because there was just too much money in the game, period. Set 11 had, it had the initial portal at the start of the game, and most of the portals give loot now. Originally, when they were created in set 9, they didn't necessarily do that, but now they pretty much just give out different amounts of loot. So you had the portals giving econ, and then augments also, in a lot of respects, provide econ. And then on top of that, the encounters mostly also provided econ. So you kind of had like this runaway thing where you had portals and augments and encounters, and they're all giving out free items and free gold. And the result was there was just too much money in the game overall. So this set took out the encounters, removing that sense of loot, or that source of loot. And it also provided a way to spend gold on the charms. So, you would have these various positive things that you might want, either an in-combat benefit to make your board stronger for the next round, or maybe you'll get something like an item component. I think the item components cost like 6 gold or something like that. And then you've got a tough choice. It's like, do I want to buy the item component to make my team stronger permanently, or do I favor holding on to my econ? And then in the late game, of course, people are buying charms because they need to win those rounds desperately at the end of the game, and that means that you're actually spending your gold. By the way, Hui just kills the entire enemy board there at the end. So in that respect, I think that the charms were also a positive thing in the fact that they gave you a way to spend gold, and it prevented econ from running away with things in the way that it did in the previous set. The economic side of the game was definitely in better shape. You did not have people hitting tons of 3-star 4 costs, again, which is a huge problem in the previous set. And it felt like the game was in better shape. You didn't have people running away to level 10 in every single game. I thought that the economic side of the game was in much better shape in this particular set. Continuing on with things that I thought were good, there were, of course, as always, some units and some traits that I thought stood out as being pretty good. I think that the real winner in this set was the Arcana trait. Really creative trait, very flexible, could be played in a lot of boards. You could make the argument it was a little bit too good in some respects, but I do think it was probably the biggest winner in terms of the traits that were designed. Again, Arcana was a 4-unit trait. You had a 2 cost, a 3 cost, a 4 cost, and a 5 cost. All the units were pretty splashable. Ari fit into a lot of comps because she had Scholar. You had 2 frontliners in Hecarim and Tahm Kench with Bastion and Vanguard trait. And then Xerath didn't really have any other traits, didn't really fit with any traits, but you could kind of play him on almost any single board because Xerath would give you Xerath charms, and he did a lot of damage. In this patch in particular, we're playing on the final patch of set 12 here. He was extremely overtuned, and you would pretty much stuff him on any single board. But Arcana, the big thing is when you play the units together, you would get additional team-wide benefits, and you could kind of choose which Arcana unit would get them. Ari was for reroll compositions. The whole team gets more AP as you get more 3 stars. Hecarim gives the team, was he give AD? Was the thing, and made units tankier. I think he gave durability as well. I didn't play through Hecarim as much because I tend not to play like melee damage dealing comps. Tahm Kench gave the whole team health, and then Xerath's ability is what was it? He gave that. What is it? What did Xerath's ability do? Oh, he did true damage based on how many charms you bought. That's right. That's right. Also did true damage based on how many charms you had. It was very flexible. And if you found an Arcana emblem, you could give... What was the Arcana emblem? I can't remember what that one did. I don't think I got a single Arcana emblem the entire set out of all the games I did. But the whole point was you could play deeper into the trait, you could splash the trait, you could use it for reroll comps, you could use it for fast 9 comps. It was a really flexible trait, and it was just really well designed. And I thought it was a great addition to the set. I used it in a lot of games, and it just felt like it made the set a lot more interesting having that there. So that one was a real winner. As far as some of the other traits go, honestly, this was not a great set in terms of traits, and most of them were pretty forgettable, which is what we're going to be getting into. I did like the bee trait. I'm actually up against a Honeymancer board right here. Honeymancer was just such a fun trait, the way that all the Honeymancer units got the little bees on them. They made the bees extra big here in the final patch, but I don't know if it was like the greatest trait ever. It was obviously a reroll trait, but at various points in time, people rerolled for the frontliners, for the Blitzcrank and the Nunu. Sometimes in some patches, people were rerolling for Ziggs. At other times, people were rerolling for Vhagar. I think there was some patches where people rerolled for Kog'Maw, although he didn't get featured as much as the others. But I did think it was just a pretty cool trait. And just the bees were really cute and adorable. So I have to say I did like that one. And I did like the fact that the tank traits were pretty straightforward in this set. You had 3 main tank traits. You had Shapeshifters that gave health. You had Vanguard that gave shields. And then you had, what's the other one that I'm missing? Wow, we're not that far into the set, and I'm still trying to remember. What's the one that gave armor and magic resistance? Let's see, you had Vanguard and Shapeshifter and Bastion. Bastion's the other one that I'm missing here. So I thought that was pretty straightforward. I liked that it was pretty easy for people to play, to identify who the tanks were and play those various units. I like it when those things are pretty straightforward. We don't need to have like super creative tank traits. We have one that gave health, one that gave shields, one that gave armor and magic resistance. Pretty straightforward, but I thought that worked pretty well. And that I don't think was one of the issues with this set. And then in terms of units that stood out, I think that the best design unit was probably Briar out of the ones that had like unique mechanics, just because you could make Briar stronger by feeding her hit points. You could continuously give her more health, which again synergized with her Shapeshifter trait, but you had to feed her some of your own health in order to do it. And like, that's a great trade-off mechanic. That was a lot better than, say, Teemo from set 5, where in order to just buy Teemo at all, you had to spend health to purchase him in the store. Like, that was kind of not a great mechanic, because it just meant if you were low on health, you literally couldn't play Teemo at all. But Briar being a unit you could always play, but she could be a lot stronger if you were willing to sacrifice health. That was a fun mechanic. And of course, every single round, again, you got that decision point. It also, I don't think a lot of people necessarily knew this, but it also really sped up a lot of these games too, because every time somebody's playing Briar and they're feeding her, they're taking health out of the total pool for the game. So it actually sped up a lot of these games too. In fact, a lot of the games went by pretty quickly here in set 12, because there'd be like 2 or 3 people playing Briar, and a lot of them are sacrificing health to Briar as the game goes on. So that speeds things up, that makes the game go faster. So that was kind of like a nice side effect as well. But it was always something you had a choice on. You never had to feed Briar. It was just something you could do, and people typically would, because you'd want to make their board stronger. But it was always a choice, and I love the decision making aspect. It makes a tough choice, and when players have difficult choices to make, that's what makes the game fun to play. So I thought that was pretty good. And then there is another big change that happened in this set that I think kind of flew under the radar, but was a huge change. As you see Hui clutch out another fight on 45 HP there. That was the fact that about halfway through the set, they changed it so you will always get an item remover on every minion round if you don't already have an item remover. Like I said, not a ton of commentary on that, but I do think that was actually a humongous change to TFT's gameplay, because throughout the history of this game, especially if you're playing into like 4 or 5 cost units, you always had to have like temporary item holders. Like let's say you're playing, I don't know, Varus in this game. Varus wants like Infinity Edge Last Whisper, so he can cast and hit the whole board with his big arrow explosion. But like, you can't play Varus from the start of the game, so traditionally you'd have to play a unit that's like not going to be on your board long term, just to hold the items that are going to go on Varus. And like, that's always been a staple of playing this game, is like having temporary item holders that like you don't want to have on your final board, which is really confusing and like non-intuitive, very, very confusing for new players. So with the addition of all these item removers, what they end up doing is they make it so, you can use current units on your board as the temporary item holders. Like right now, I've got all my tank items on Blitz. Back in the day, I would have had to sell the Blitzcrank to get these items off because they're clearly going to go on Mordekaiser later. But now that we get the item removers at the end of every round, I know that I can put these items on Blitz. I will not have to sell the Blitzcrank, and I can just use an item remover to take them off and put them on Mordekaiser later. So this does make the game less complicated. It like does lower kind of like the complexity of the game in a way, in the sense that like you don't have to very carefully think about who the items go on, but it's also pretty clearly a net improvement for the gameplay overall, because like long term it just didn't really make sense how the game was configured. It was really silly how you had to like constantly not put items on units that you wanted to play, because then you'd have to sell them later on. So it is kind of a stupid way to play the game, and this is definitely an improvement. It's taken me a little while to get used to it, but like you just have to remember that you're going to get those item removers, and so it makes it just easier to play the game. So I think that was a major improvement, and I don't think that necessarily everyone has intuited the fact that this change has been made. I think a lot of the, like, look at this player. They still have like 8 items on their bench. There is no reason not to slam items now. You get those item removers. You want to slam those items. You can put them on anyone and pop the items off later. So definitely do that. So like I said, I think that was a real quality of life improvement for the gameplay as a whole. And it's like now you look back at gameplay from like 2 or 3 sets ago and you're like, oh man, I can't believe that we didn't have those item removers. So just a small change, but one that really improved the gameplay. So kudos for that as well. Anyway, that's kind of my summary of what I liked about this set, the things that I thought were good. And now we're going to spend the rest of the video on things that weren't so good. And I have to say that overall, the balance of this game, or this particular set, I do think was more in the negative than in the positive. As I said, it wasn't I want to be clear, it wasn't a bad set, but it just didn't really stand out. It was kind of a mediocre set. And I'll start right away with the issue of theming. Now, this might seem kind of an abstract thing because the theming of the set doesn't really affect the gameplay per se, but I do think that it does matter as far as when a set has like a very clear theme and consistency to it, because it kind of makes way more sense for the entire set. And I do think it also helps draw in new players. Like for example, the set that's upcoming, set 13, very clearly has Arcane, and everything in the set is going to be based around the Arcane TV show. Like obviously that's easier for them to do for something like that than it is for a set like this one, Mischief and Mayhem. But I mean, it helps, right? It draws in new players, and you can like clearly understand the game. They're going to have like, there's going to be a trait that's like all of the Piltover enforcers. Like, okay, that's easy to understand. And there's going to be one that's like all of the Chemtech people are going to be a trait. And pardon me, I don't know all the stuff for set 13. It was only just revealed literally in the last 24 hours. But like, yeah, like a lot of that stuff, it helps. Like it helps learning the units. It helps making it easier to build your team. I do think that like having a consistent theme really matters. And that was not something that was the case here in set 12. So the theme is Mischief and Mayhem, and like some of that made sense. You had things like obviously the Witchcraft trait where all the characters are wearing cute little witch hats. And you had things like the Sugarmancer trait or the Honey trait. You know, it's like very cutesy, kind of like Halloween themed stuff. But a lot of the other traits just had no connection to that whatsoever. Like we have Frost and Pyro. Like what do they have to do with Mischief and Mayhem? They're like elemental traits. Like what? And then we had things like Eldritch, which I mean, I guess that kind of fits a Halloween theme. But like I'm just looking at some of the other traits here, like Chrono trait, Portal trait. Like how does Portal fit with this? I don't like. It's just like kind of random stuff that like doesn't really fit here. I don't know. It felt like this set was all over the place in terms of its thematic stuff. I mean, I guess I can see like Fairy and Dragon, but like, how does Portal fit with that? I don't know. It's just kind of a weird set where the units don't necessarily fit together in any clear way. So I do think that hurt the set in the sense that I think maybe if they had stuck to more of a Halloween theme, then it would have maybe fit better. But like a lot of the stuff just felt really random in this set. So like I said, I think that was kind of a big deal. And I do think that hurt the set long term, not having a consistent theme that the whole set could kind of be based around. So not a huge deal, but I don't think that it helped. More important, something that definitely affected the set more was really the balancing. And honestly, the balancing in this set was terrible. I'm not trying to mince words here. This was a very, very poorly balanced set. And that was ultimately, I think, the biggest problem for this set. The thing that really hurt my enjoyment the most, because I had very high expectations for this set. I thought this was going to be a really good set when I heard the set mechanic with the charms. And I was pretty disappointed by this one. It really did not live up to what I was hoping we would achieve. And the biggest reason is the balance was bad. It just was a bad set in terms of balance. They did not do a very good job. And that started with the very first patch of the set, which is kind of gonna go down in TFT lore for how bad it was. And that was the Syndra patch. Like on release, Syndra was just absurdly overtuned, like ridiculously overtuned. And she was overtuned on the PBE as well. So they really should have caught that. It's like not really, it's not like it was something that no one saw coming. People in the PBE, which is the beta environment, were well aware that Syndra's numbers were set too high. But she was so strong that basically the game was almost unplayable because a 2-star Syndra, who by the way is a 2-cost unit, 2-star 2-cost Syndra was like stronger than a 2-star 4-cost. Not equal to the strength of a 2-star 4-cost, stronger than a 2-star 4-cost. She had like a 4.05 average placement, and that was with like 4 people playing her in every lobby. It was completely absurd. The problem is the developers had released a very minor nerf to her on the day that the set was released. They like tweaked one of her numbers by a small amount, and then as soon as they do that, they're like, well, we affected one of her numbers. Now we can't patch her again, so we can't release a B patch to make her weaker. There's just nothing we can do at this point. And it was like, well, maybe you guys should just have your own client so you're not stuck in these positions. Like, can you guys get your own freaking client? The game's been out for 5 years. Just bite the bullet, make your own client so you're not stuck in these ridiculous situations. But nope, nothing they could do. So for 2 weeks, the game was just completely broken and it was almost unplayable. It was so bad. But it was really frustrating, and unfortunately the balance didn't really get a lot better than that. Now, they nerfed Syndra into the ground immediately thereafter, but like after that, we had another whole month where it was really Ahri reroll was extremely overtuned as well. So we had like 2 weeks of Syndra reroll. It was like Syndra, and Kassadin was almost as strong. Kassadin kind of flew under the radar, but he was almost as strong. So completely dominant 2-cost reroll. And then they got nerfed, but then immediately this Ahri reroll build just took over. And then we had another 2-cost reroll that was way too strong. And then that was supposed to get nerfed after that, but it really didn't. So we had like a full month of Ahri reroll being extremely overtuned. So like for the first 6 weeks of this set, it was all 2-cost and to a lesser extent 1-cost reroll. And like the 4-costs were almost unplayable because they were so weak. Like that's really bad. You can't have the first 6 weeks of the set be dominated by 1 and 2-cost reroll builds with the 4-cost barely even getting any attention. I mean, what this really shows is TFT's gameplay really, really requires having a mixture of reroll and like 4-cost and fast 9 team compositions to be for the gameplay to be in good shape. You can't have one particular economic setup being so dominant, and they just did not hit that balance at all in this set. Like not at all. Later on in the set, they nerfed all the reroll builds, and then 4-cost reroll was dominant for like a month. Largely, especially in the form of Callista, to a lesser extent Portal, but like Callista was very dominant for like a 4-week stretch where it was just get one Rage Blade on Callista, get the fairy crown and the fairy armor, whatever they are, and then like 1-star Callista and 1-star Rakan would just beat everything. It was pretty bad overall. So like it's not like the balance got a lot better overall. The balance was very shaky for almost the entirety of the set. I guess you could say at the very end of the set it did get better, but I still don't know if it was great overall. So it was just a really rough set in terms of balance. And there's really no excuse for that. This is set 12, right? They've been doing this for years at this point. Like there's no excuse for it being that bad. But it really actively hurt the popularity of this set because you could just see in the player data on Twitch. They don't Riot doesn't release numbers of how many people play the game, but you can look at Twitch data and get an idea. This set nosedived pretty quickly, and I have to think that the fact that the balance was so poor really was a major problem with that. Now, this was also due to the way that the charms worked, and we really have to cover some of the shortcomings of the charms because even though in some ways they were good, I talked about some of the things they did that were good. In other ways, they were really problematic as a mechanic, and I don't think they quite hit the mark that the developers were going for. So one of the biggest issues with the charms is just the way that they pop up in the store. Remember, the idea was that you would see one in every few stores, that you would get one, every 3 stores originally, and then it would go down to every 2 stores after that. Well, the charms had to be good, right? Like, obviously the charms had to be beneficial. If the charms aren't beneficial, then the set mechanic doesn't work. But because you see them every X number of shops, that inherently favored reroll comps. And that's a reason why we had so many reroll comps being so dominant throughout the set. Even here, the final patch of the set rerolls back to being pretty dominant again. It's just, if you're going to see a charm like every 3 shops, well, a reroll player is going to see a charm every single round, maybe 2 charms if they don't buy the first one, whereas a player who's like trying to go to play 4-cost carries or rush level 9, they're only going to see one like every 3 rounds. That's a gigantic advantage for the reroll players. When you're getting, a charm every round when a bunch of the other players are only seeing one every couple of rounds, like that's a really, really big edge. So I think that's one of the reasons why the reroll comps were so dominant over the history of this set. Just the nature of the charm mechanic kind of favored it being that way. And then the other thing that's pretty obvious is the late game fights were too dependent on charms, and I don't really see how this could be avoided just due to the way that the charms mechanic was structured, period. Is the late game fights, the difference between having a strong charm for a fight at the end of the game, all that matters is winning rounds. Economy doesn't matter anymore at the end of the game. All that matters is winning the rounds. So when you're down to your last life, the biggest thing is just, do you get a strong charm for that round? And there's just so much randomness in that, because a whole bunch of the charms that you can get at the end of the game didn't even have any combat effects, or did almost nothing, whereas other ones were game-breakingly powerful. You'd get the earthquake one that would stun the entire enemy board for 2 seconds. Or if you have Xerath, you could get the star, which causes all of your 1-star units to become 2-star units. It's let's say you have a 1-star Xerath, a 1-star Morgana, and a 1-star, a Diana on the board, and then suddenly they're all 2-star units, every single one of them. That's kind of a strong charm, that they all suddenly become 2-starred. That's kind of good. Maybe not the most balanced thing to have right there. So anyway, you get the point. The late game charms a little bit too strong, a little bit too swingy. It was even worse earlier in this set. They had that stupid charm where if somebody bought the one charm, they couldn't die that round. The value of that was literally infinite. They took that out of the game after a patch or 2, but why was that even in the game at all? It's if you're on 5 HP, there is nothing that could possibly be more valuable than, well, if you lose this round, you don't die, you just survive instead. That was a terrible idea. Why was that in the game? So the late game charms really didn't work, and I just don't know how they could possibly avoid that situation. So it was one of the biggest flaws of the mechanic. It overly favored reroll boards, and in the late game, the combat charms just took over, and they were just too swingy in terms of their RNG. So even though I think this mechanic did some good things overall, it was really problematic in other ways, and I don't think we're going to be seeing it come back again for a little while. I don't think that we'll be seeing the charms, and I don't think people are going to be too sad to see the charms go. It was also just one last note on this. It was kind of annoying that at the end of the game, you'll be I'd really like to roll for, it's one more unit to cap out my board, but I can't do it. I just have to spend all my gold at the end of the game on buying charms, because if I don't buy them, then I have no chance in these late game fights, because I can't beat these other boards if they have a charm and I don't have a charm. And that was kind of annoying. That wasn't really fun to have a situation like that. So not great. As I said, there were some flaws here that maybe could have been done a bit better. By the way, my pass off in that game almost duplicated the Galio, but then I did duplicate the Mordekaiser. So I've been able to hit Mordekaiser 3, Hui 3, somewhat unexpectedly Rumble 3. And it doesn't look like I'm going to hit the Ezreal, so now I'm going to level to 9 and play the 6 Vanguards, because this board gets way stronger when it hits 6 Vanguards. All right. So we covered some of the issues. Like we said, no clear theming, balance being really shaky this whole set, and then the charms. Covered the good things about the charms. I also wanted to cover some of the bad things about the charms as well. Another thing I wanted to hit is this was not a good set for flex play. I'm hardly the only person to make this point, but if you read some of the discussions online, this was a set that played pretty heavily into verticals, and it really was not a set where you could just kind of play what you hit. You kind of had to decide what you wanted to play at the very start of the game, and then lean into that throughout the whole course of the game. There wasn't a lot of opportunities to go in one direction and then suddenly turn and pivot in another direction. And part of the problem is the itemization was pretty specific on most of the 4 costs. 4 costs also were pretty weak throughout the history of this set as well, and that was also an issue. But like, they didn't really share a lot of items in terms of like your 4 cost carries. They kind of all needed specific stuff. Biggest example that would be Callista needs Rage Blades, but like the other 4 cost ranged AD unit was Varus, and Varus hates Rage Blade. So it's like one unit can't be played without Rage Blade, and the other one cannot use Rage Blade. So it's a must-have on Callista, but you can't really run it on Varus without it being a terrible item. So, you know, not a great fit there either. And then it was also problematic because almost all of the mages wanted a blue buff, but almost all of the casters that weren't mages didn't want a blue buff. So like Vhagar wants a blue buff, like Nami is good with blue, though Nami's not bad. Nami, I guess, was decent with Shojin, but Nami wasn't really a carry unit either. Most of the re-rolled spellcasters like Ahri wanted a blue buff, Ziggs wanted a blue buff. Syndra, I think, was pretty good with blue buff as well. But then, like, the 5 cost units wanted Shojin, right? Like, if you're going to play Xerath, he wants a Shojin. Blue buff's no good on him. Nora wants a Shojin. Blue buff's not good on him. Another big issue, the other 4 cost spellcaster is Ryze, but Ryze didn't want blue buff or Shojin. He wanted attack speed. He wanted, like, red buff and Archangel Staff and, I guess, Death Cap. So, like, these units just did not share itemization at all, and that made it really hard to flex between different team compositions. You kind of had to identify your team right away, because otherwise your items otherwise you wouldn't have items that fit your team composition. So that was kind of a problem in terms of playing this particular set. Would have been nice to have a little bit more flexibility. Now, this can go too far. I've never liked the sets where people are like, I'm just going to level to level 9 and then I'll just put in all of the 5 costs and then I'll just figure it out from there. I don't think you want to go that far in that direction. But I do think that this set was a little too inflexible in terms of how this stuff plays out. I think it could have been definitely better in that regard. On a related note, this set was also too dependent on emblems in terms of its traits, and that was the case for many, many, many traits across the board. What I mean by this is a trait where if you have an emblem, suddenly the trait becomes extremely strong, but if you don't have an emblem, it just is kind of like a garbage trait. Here's a classic example. This person has an Eldritch emblem. Eldritch was exactly a trait like that. So Eldritch 5, absolutely awful. Eldritch 5 was a terrible, and I mean a terrible trait. It had a horrible placement in the data, but you get that emblem to go up to Eldritch 7, all of a sudden Eldritch 7 becomes really strong, like really, really strong. By the way, look at Ezreal clutch out this fight on literally like 2% health, so we can knock this person out. He did 12,000 damage after surviving on really low health. So good job there, Ezreal. But Eldritch was just like that. Otherwise, Eldritch has to hit Briar in order to play the 7 Eldritch. So like you get that +1, all of a sudden Eldritch goes from terrible Eldritch 5 to great Eldritch 7. Frost, another trait like that. Frost 5, awful. Really bad in the data. Frost 5 typically had like average placement 4.7, 4.8. But you get that one Frost emblem, then you don't have to find Diana. You put the Frost emblem on Varus, boom, all of a sudden Frost 7 has average placement like 4.2. And there are a whole bunch of traits like this. Fairy, absolutely the same thing. Fairy with no emblem, terrible. Fairy with +1, awesome. Witchcraft with no emblem, really bad. You have to find Morgana to play 6 Witchcraft. Witchcraft with +1, Witchcraft, great. You put it on Rise, just like this person has done here. You can play 6 Witchcraft without having to find Morgana. All of a sudden, 6 Witchcraft, great. So when like almost every vertical looks like that, that's kind of a problem, because you don't want to have it set up so that every vertical trait needs +1 from an emblem in order to be playable, or else it's really garbage. You don't want to have, what they really needed to do is just smooth out the difference between some of them. The difference between hitting the full vertical and only getting halfway there. There was too big of a gap between them, and that was just not what you wanted there. So I think that that's another area where they could have done better. And then finally, I do want to mention this as well. Lack of econ traits. This might seem like kind of an odd thing, but this set really didn't have an econ trait. The closest it had was Sugarcraft, but Sugarcraft really wasn't an economic trait. It was, you would stack up the cake over time, but like you wouldn't get the rewards until the game was almost over. Like there was nothing like fortune or underground or anything like that. And I do think that the set really was hurt by the lack of that. I mentioned this about set 11 as well, that set 11 also didn't really have a mechanic like that, like an econ trait. And I thought that that hurt set 11 as well. Now, I did mention that set 11 had way too much econ in it in the first place. So maybe that was a good thing, but I do think that this set really would have benefited if it had a trait like Underground, where like you could just run it for a couple rounds in the beginning of the game, generate some econ, and then maybe you transition out of it. But it just didn't have anything like it, and it really felt like the set was missing something like that. Like, I would have loved to have run an economic trait for a little while and then transition out of it, but there's just no opportunity to do that in this set. So, as I said, I did think that the set was really held back by that. By the way, here I'm going to take the Smolder off Carousel and duplicate the Smolder for a 2-star Smolder, and I think that that's going to be enough to put my board over the top against this person whose board is pretty solid. The main thing this person has is a 2-star Zareth, and I lost that last round because Hui died quickly in the fight, but I'm going to try to protect him a little bit better going forward. So as I said, lack of econ traits was another big issue in the set, just because, I mean, it's like they're not always the best balanced, but it is fun to play them. And I don't know, they tried to replace that with some augments. Like there were a couple of augments where like you could, if you lost like 10 rounds in a row and then cashed out, then you would get like a big reward, but they almost never showed up in this. Like you would only see them like maybe like once or twice per set, so you didn't really see a lot of them, and it just felt like this set was kind of missing something. Like there weren't really any. I don't think there was a single trait that was like no in combat benefit, but then you get this econ reward. I don't think there was a single trait like that in the whole set, and it did feel like it was missing that. So as I said, that would be another weakness. It does look like we're gonna have some of them for the next set. By the way, this that last round I won with 1 unit surviving, so that one was pretty close. But I didn't have a charm that round, so hopefully having this Dragon's Claw will help out this round. So anyway, we're about to wrap this up. You can see that this video footage is almost done. Overall, this was pretty clearly a placeholder set, and I hate to use that term. I don't want to be disrespectful to set 12, but I mean, it really felt like this was here to tide things over until set 13, which is the set that the developers actually care about. It seems pretty clear that both set 11 and set 12 were just like, we need something to fill time. What we actually care about is, they cared about set 10, which was the music set. They put a lot of time and effort into that one. And then it was clear that the set 13, which is the arcane set, that's the one that they then next cared about. And they were like, we just need to do something for like the next 8 months before we can get the next set that we actually care about. And so they did encounters, and then they did charms, and like both of them were pretty low, pretty non-resource intensive mechanics. Like they obviously didn't really care that much about this set. I mean, and it showed. So it like this was okay, but it just was kind of a mediocre set, for lack of a better word. I just don't think that there's much about this set that I'm gonna look back and like remember as being something that stood out. We thought that this set would at least have like a Feather Knight little chibi with like a little witch hat on, and we didn't even get that. Like, where was our Feather Knight with the little witch hat? We didn't even get that option. So just kind of a disappointment overall. I had pretty high hopes for this set, and it really didn't meet them, and I didn't play as much of this as some of the others. So I don't think this is going to be remembered as anything more than like a time filler set, and that's kind of sad, but I think that's ultimately where we end up with this one. So anyway, on that note, thanks for watching, thanks for listening. Let's hope for more in the next set. Until then, take care, folks, and I'll see you again soon.